I'd like to talk about some practical ideas to help us all make better decisions. I begin with a few aspects of the facts of what will we use and what won't we use, a couple perspectives, and then talk about 5 elements that I think are pretty crucial that all of us can use and the people we know can use and make better choices. What is a nudge anyway? I define a nudge as a modification of a presentation of a decision to influence the choice of the decision maker. Now, people have done this for years and years in the advertising area. Of course, ads are trying to influence you and nudge you to make a decision in their interest, the people who are selling the products. After that, then it's just not showing up there. Governments and businesses help nudge people a lot of times on the decisions that are important to the people. This is what Thaler and Sunstein wrote about, and the nudges are based on behavioral science insights of how people do make decisions. The thing they often do is choose the easiest decision or the do-nothing decision without a lot of thinking about what the implications of that are. And they defined the word nudge. It wasn't for a decision before that. Decision analysis creates a phenomenal number of insights about the pros and cons of various alternatives. But it doesn't make any decisions, as we all know. So it gives great nudges in many ways to help the people make a better decision in their own interest. That's prescriptive. But what wasn't around is the prescriptive stuff for individuals to make decisions when they don't have analysts to help them or anyone else. What can they do? So what are some facts and why this matters? The only purposeful way you can influence anything in your life is through your decisions. You can have a better life if you make better decisions. And there's been research by Johannes Siebert on that to show that, and just some studies too. And so decision making should be recognized as really a primary skill. Second fact, as a skill, which is the ability to perform something of a high quality. And the answer of how do you do that is you need to do 2 things. Learn what it is, and then practice using it. For instance, if you don't practice the elements, you won't be very good. Imagine if you took tennis and you learned what you should do, how to serve, how to hit backhands, how to hit forehands, and all you ever did was play games of tennis. You wouldn't be very good at all compared to what would happen if you would practice those elements. The first serve, the second serve, the backhand, the forehand, the lob. One at a time, in many cases, you'd be much, much better. I think it's the same for decision making. And we'll see what those elements are corresponding to that. Fact 4, decision analysis isn't widely used. And the reasons, I feel it's way too tough for most people to do. There's way too much learning. And it's certainly quantitative. And to indicate how tough this is, at a talk with the Society of Decision Professionals, I asked, and with the help of some people in the room, how many personal decisions have you done a complete decision analysis of, and how many professional decisions? And there's the answers by the people in the society, a subset of the people who, without question, better know how to do analysis than about anyone. And many, many people there have less than 10 personal decisions with a complete analysis. I'm one of those. On the other hand, every decision I make that's worthy of thought is done consistent, I think, with the principles of decision analysis. Having some idea of what those are, how to use them, including all the quantitative aspects, you can decide what's crucial. Once in a while, it might be something sophisticated, like the probabilities or a probability distribution of things happen. Sometimes it may be the key thing is just the trade-off between 2 or 3 of the objectives that you're concerned about. And so you think about them. That's all you need to lend the clarity to make a much, much better choice. And so that's why you get fewer even on the personal decisions and the professional decisions. Those are done by people in companies that do a lot of analysis and by consultants like those in the room, and some I've done in the past too. And you can't do too many of those. They take a long time. So in teaching decision making, our objective should be to improve individual decisions. First of all, I think there are no group decisions. Group maybe signs off, but the mind is what thinks, and decisions are made by the mind. So you want to improve the individual decisions, not just to teach people how they can improve their decisions. You got to show them how and get them to practice so they can do that. This would lead you to, 1, let them know what ideas are really crucial, and then how to do them and how to practice them. And then a key aspect is to having people use it on their own decisions. Because what does that do? If they use it on their own decisions, not the toughest maybe, it might clearly improve that decision for them. And if they see, gee, I spent 10 minutes thinking about a few new alternatives, one of them's a lot better, and so this worked out a lot better, they get the benefits right away. If they get those benefits, I think there's a much greater chance that they'll be more interested in really learning more about what they can do to improve their decisions. The front end and the back end of decisions. When I started learning about decision analysis, anything you'd see written about how to learn it in that process could have begun with a sentence like this. Given a decision problem of the following description, with these objectives and these alternatives, then. And you look at the probabilities, they give you some data, so you have to build some models there. You need to get an objective function. You try to figure out the pros and cons. You do sensitivity analysis, and you get insights. And I thought, this is great. And I figured people certainly knew the front end. Somebody has a decision, they got to know what their decision is and what their objectives are and what their alternatives are. And I'm sure everybody in this room who's done consulting knows that often isn't the case. They take off and work on a part of their decision, or maybe just a means component to it. Or they don't have all the objectives at all, and it's just not a full analysis. It only does one that's easy to analyze. They don't take the tough ones where, heaven forbid, judgment would be needed, and there's a lot of uncertainty about that. And so it's very far from true that people can do that front end. And the key thing is, how can you do a good analysis of a decision if you don't have a clear front end of that decision? You're analyzing something that isn't your real decision, or is a part of it, or only half of it because you don't have all the objectives, or the alternatives. So it's key to deal with those 3. Those are the 3 essential elements, I think, for any decision. I'll comment on those and then 2 others. Your decision statement should be 1 sentence and very clear. A great way to judge it is, does anyone else who reads it understand what your decision is? Now, if you say, boy, I've got problems with my job and I've got to make some decisions, I don't think anybody would know what your real decision is there. What's causing those problems? What are the effects on you? What can you do to possibly have an impact on that set of things? It's not clear, so you want a clear statement that begins, like, decide where to go for an upcoming 1-week vacation. That's pretty clear. But it's worthwhile sometimes thinking of alternative statements, like the one there. Decide what to do for an upcoming week that's free. Vacations is only one of the options. You could take a special course and learn how to make better decisions. Skip your vacation and have the rest of your life much better. Anyway, you want to work on the right decision. Now, what's an example of this for a nudge? A friend of mine, actually in this vicinity, talked to me about a friend of hers who I've never heard of, don't even know her name, in England. And she said, this friend just found out that her husband had had an affair for the following 2 years and wanted to get even with him. And she said, what do you think I should do? And I didn't think that sounded like the right decision, but I said, well, do they have any children? Yes, 7 and 11, 2 children. I said, it seems to me at least a much better decision would be decide what to do that is in the best interest of your children and yourself for their lives. That was translated to her, communicated to her, and what I heard is it just totally changed the way she thought about it. You don't get even or teach a lesson. Those are terrible definitions of decisions. Delve into it. What do you want to achieve by any of that or hope to get out of it? Just that change of the statement was a nudge that would certainly lead to, hopefully, better choices. And it could include bringing her husband back in much more to the family, or maybe pushing him out, however the situation was. I know nothing about the details there. But that's where getting your decision right really matters. Now, and here's some examples of poor decision statements. Decide to purchase a cheap TV. That even starts with decide. Likely, something else would be important there on a TV. It costs enough, and if for $20 more you could get a lot of other benefits, like it fits much better where you want it to fit, or it's much bigger, it's worth it. That's a poor categorization with just like that. Or decide what to do because the job isn't interesting. Again, that relates to the comment I made earlier. There's so many things that could be there. You want to be more specific about it. And decide if you should visit Canada for a summer vacation. Any statement where you give one alternative versus anything else that you could possibly do is a pretty poor statement, because it's hard to think about that. Whether Canada is a great alternative depends on what the best of the other alternatives are. If it's worse than Canada, Canada's a good thing, but it's a poor frame for the decision to state it something or not, usually. Decide whether or not to visit your grandmother this weekend, if you really want to see your grandmother sometime. If you do that sequentially for a lot of weekends, you might never make it. There's always something that's going on that weekend. You just wouldn't go. If you change your decision, decide when in the next 2 months to visit my grandmother. All alternatives include the key thing you're interested in, visiting your grandmother. You won't miss that. It will just occur at the best time. And decide whether to exercise a day. A lot of decisions are made at the wrong level. You don't want to do that. It's just like you don't want to decide, shall I brush my teeth tonight, each night. Set a policy and pretty much follow it. If there's a real good reason to break it for one day or one time when you were going to exercise, fine. There is a good reason to break it. But have the policy. You don't need to make the decision all the time. Second, identifying values and stating objectives. That's a key thing. What do you hope to make it? Why do you care about making a decision? You want to achieve something. And so values are what you care about in a decision, and objectives are a way to state that value once you've listed it in an achievement orientation with a verb and a noun, like maximize profits, for instance. And are people good at doing this? I've done plenty of studies. It's tough. Since it's a university, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, I've asked all kinds of doctoral students, what are the objectives of your dissertation? Early, when they're thinking of their topics that they're going to write it on. The number of people who have one objective, get a PhD, is remarkable. Because first of all, any dissertation that's accepted gets the PhD, so it doesn't differentiate anything. And I asked some of these people, do you want to learn anything in the 2 years you're writing this? Would you like to be able to write an article on it, have some fun, meet some interesting people as a result, get a better job? And many times they think, yeah, well, that sounds pretty good. But it never came up on several questions. And you wonder, how can that possibly happen? And these are, relatively educated people. They're getting a PhD. And If you don't know what you want to achieve, it's going to be pretty unlikely, other than just through luck, that you do achieve it. Now, one little example there is, suppose somebody who you'd heard about was coming to town next week. And through some ways, it was arranged that you could have a dinner, just you and them, on next Wednesday night. You were excited. You checked where their hotel was and wanted a restaurant near their hotel, great food, local cuisine. You talked to the people in the hotel, what's around here? And they said, oh, there's a great restaurant 2 blocks away, and you hear about it. You sign up. The time comes, you meet the person, you go to the restaurant, you have dinner. It's a fantastic dinner, but a disastrous evening. It was way too loud. You didn't really get to have a conversation. You didn't really learn anything about the person from the person much, and they don't know who you are. Had you just thought a little more carefully about your objectives and thought, well, I want to have a quality discussion and really get to know the person, you never would have gone to that restaurant. Or had you even just said, I'd like a restaurant to be relatively quiet, you never would have gone there. Either one of those, one objective would have avoided a disastrous decision. What's a process to identify your values and objectives? I break those into what you care about and what you want to achieve, because people are more willing to write down what they care about, because that's any way they want to state it and place it out there. Once you've got it written down somewhere, then you can pursue, well, what do you want to achieve regarding that? Found out a long time ago doing consulting, if you ask for objectives, people will say, well, is that an objective? I can't even measure that, so that's not an objective. You know, some pretty important objectives, you don't know how to measure right then, but if they're important, they're important. So you start with the values, and then there's a lot of ideas to stimulate more thinking about it, because you want to get it broader, and then you can ask for ideas from others. You don't want to do that first, otherwise you can anchor on what they're saying, and then you can use whatever you identified in values to probe for more, and then, of course, it's easy to convert them to a verb and a noun, verb and an object. Here's many of the ways to stimulate the thinking. From what feelings do you have about what you care about? You may have a couple alternatives that jumped into mind because you think they're great on something. Well, whatever they're great on, one. Or an alternative you're sure you don't want that people are kind of promoting. What's it bad on? Well, that indicates what an objective is too. And all these are going to help you identify various objectives. Step 3, ask others for suggestions. And that's self-clearing. And then use the values that are there. And you just push, what do you mean by that value? Why do you care about that value? And you can get means, ends, relationships, and detailed relationships, or the bigger picture. I mean the one at the bottom there, somebody on a business decision way, well, I'm interested in product quality. Oh. Why do you care about that? Well, it could lead to more sales. Why do you care about that? Well, we have more income. And why do you care about that? Well, maximize profit. So there's 4 different objectives. They're all related. You got the means, ends relationship in that. You want to use one of those, but not all of them, to evaluate an alternative. You'd be double counting, unless there's other ways that can impact those you want to think about. The third element, creating alternatives. Those are the potential choices you have, obviously. Everybody knows that. 2 important facts about alternatives. You can never choose an alternative you didn't think of, and the alternative you could choose can be no better than the best of the ones you have thought of. So it's a great nudge if you can create one more alternative. And how good are people at doing that? Again, they, and I say people, I mean, sometimes I'm pretty short on this. I miss alternatives or objectives that should have been obvious to me and make a big difference. So it's not just them. What's an example? That same big dinner example. Even if you didn't think of another objective that was to have a quiet restaurant, suppose you just ask the hotel, well, I'd like to have 4 alternatives and go take a look at them for a couple minutes. So some evening before that Wednesday, You walk around and you walk in those restaurants. You would have noticed, no, not this one, it's way too noisy. You would have ended up in a better place. Same example. What are the pitfalls? Often people don't spend any time creating alternatives, or they grab the first one that they can think of. And why? Typically, we're solving decision problems. Who likes problems? Nobody likes problems. So, gosh, if I can solve this and get rid of it, it's great. So it's kind of the quick way out. And if your first alternative, well, that's probably good enough, that'll work, then it probably is good enough. And if that's your standard for life, that's not good enough. You really can do a lot better. And there's some other things down there that indicate what the problems are. I mean, incomplete constraints. People could say, well, here's some constraints. Like, you're buying a house. You're certainly not going to buy it for more than whatever, let's say $700,000, something that would be cheap in the area around here. You know, if you found a fabulous place for $730,000, maybe it would be worthwhile. It would have way more value, let's say. It just was terrific. One should think about that. The constraint would rule it out if you really used it strongly. You don't want to focus only on alternatives for others. If somebody comes up and says, well, you got a decision, you got to do A or B, often C, D, or E would deal with any of their concerns or why they're telling you this and be a lot better than A or B. Don't accept what's handed to you without thinking. So some practical guidance for creating alternatives. The reason you care about them is to achieve objectives. So the basis is use your objectives and ask one objective at a time, what might be a good alternative for that? Now, those alternatives will probably be bad on some other objectives if there are some there. Then look at pairs. What are some good alternatives at pairs? And then you look at how can I improve some of the best on each of those lists by putting in things from other parts of that list. It's kind of combining them in clever ways to get the best out of it. And then eventually, again, get feedback from outside people on some important problems. Your colleagues and friends, that can often help. Now, the last two elements are a little bit different. Most decisions we deal with, and the word we often hear is decision problems. And there's another concept. Well, I should ask, where do decision problems come from? Typically, they come from the results, the decisions of others, or happenstance. Your car breaks down, you lose your job, you get sick. You have a decision problem. Your child's not doing well in school. You can't find the faculty club when you come down here. Problems. Well, you can solve those, and they're decisions, of course. But what you can do is create your own decisions. Those I call decision opportunities. Examples are there. Decide you're going to exercise more, eat more responsibly, or improve your decision making. And I know I can improve my decision making skills. And I think most people can. And those who really think about decisions, like everybody in this room, has times probably in the last year when they realize, boy, I learned something. I don't know, I didn't know that before, but that's a good thing to know. So any of those decisions you come up with that are opportunities nudge you to some very good things. Because what happens? If you have a decision problem there on the left, your quality of life is where it's marked on the picture there, and a decision problem occurs, like you get sick. Your quality of life just dropped a little bit. You figure out how to solve it, and depending, somehow it hopefully creeps back to where it was, at least. It might go a little above it, might not go a little above it. If you lose your job, you might never get a job as good as that. But you'd be in the pink area there. But you don't improve your life with decision problems and solving them much. Decision opportunities, you start at the same level on the quality of life there and decide, well, here's a decision opportunity. Your life didn't degrade when you decided that. And if that's something you care about and you figure out a way to improve things, choose an alternative, then your life does improve. It goes up somewhere in where that bluish green picture is. So decision opportunities are a great thing to come up with. And the last one is getting Authorization for alternatives. A situation where another individual, who I call the authorized decision maker, controls the decision you'd like to have. When you're the age of the people, many of the people who are being taught by DEF, their parents have a lot of control. The teachers have a lot of control. And of course, your boss has a lot of control. And most people aren't the absolute head of an organization, et cetera. And maybe things are quite collegial, but still, other people need to give their authorization in order for you to do that. And an example might be, suppose you couldn't afford more for a house than the $700,000. But you found out, or that the people selling it didn't live here anymore and lived quite a distance away. They'd need to clean out a lot of things there. That wouldn't be easy. And you could say, and they might find it tough to do in the next month when the thing would close. You could say, you know, the deal, you can clean it out at your convenience, or just take what you want, and we'll clean it out afterwards. And you have whatever time you need, up to 3 months. Maybe you knew they were for sure going to do it by then, and you didn't need the house for 3 months. Just that offer, you might get it for the $700,000 because you just made their life a lot easier. They don't need to worry from that point on. And they maybe didn't even particularly care about the money. They just wanted to have it, quote, be a fair deal. That often works. If somebody's leaving to another country after 3 months, and there's in a 3-month period, they've lived here for 6 years, and then they're going to be gone. Well, if they have to move out and find a new place to stay for 3 months before they leave, that's a lot of hassle. You can take care of that by just your alternative. And then I'd like to mention one other thing about this that's maybe particularly applicable as a story to the people who are being taught this by DEF. Janet and my son, Greg, when he was 10 years old, well, first of all, he got pounded a lot on making decisions, of course. But he came home from school one day, he was 10, and he said, there's a special program on television tonight at 8 o'clock for an hour. Could I watch it? And I said, who controls whether you can watch it? He says, well, you do. I said, you're right. Do you have any homework to do? He said, yes. I said, if you did the homework as well as you could do it and completely, how long would it take you? He said, about an hour. I said, what if you didn't ask me the question? Could you watch that program tonight, but rather ask me the following question? You said, I have an hour's worth of homework to do. It'll take me an hour to do it very well. And if I do that and finish it, will you let me watch this 8 to 9 television program tonight? What would I say? He said, you'd say I could watch it. I said, you're right. So who would control whether you can watch that program? And he had a puzzled look for about 2 seconds, and then a smile started coming, and it got bigger and bigger. And he said, I'm going to go do my homework right now as well as I can. And what a great deal. He had the power, and that's what you can offer to a 10-year-old kid on many things, and the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old and anyone else. If they can create an alternative that meets your needs, they get it. And typically with a child, the needs are actually good for them. I mean, I wanted him to do the homework and do it well all the time. So here was an example. And he found, gee, that even works. That's pretty good. I maybe ought to do this more often. So it's a great idea. He still does it. He's in his 30s now. If he gets a great idea that he maybe wishes to pursue and needs some help or coordination from us, he'll think of how can it be great for us. Couldn't be better than that. He's thought of some really good things to do. So that's creating an offer that can't be refused, the story that I just told you about with Greg. And that empowerment is really crucial because that's what decisions do for you. And if people really get that, they're going to be, I think, more interested in decision making. So there's some practical ideas here on those 5 elements and other things and how to practice them and everything in my book, Give Yourself a Nudge. And writing that, it was what is practical that people could do, most people who wanted to could do, and improve their decisions without spending too much time or changing the natural things to them in their decision. All those elements aren't so unnatural. The last 2, maybe creating decision opportunities, maybe aren't common, but once you've created it, it's just a decision. And all people have dealt with a lot of decisions. And they've thought about alternatives and objectives and exactly what is my decision. This just helps them do what they already do, which is a plus. You don't want to start out, and I don't think anybody's ever done this, saying, you're making your decisions completely wrong. Here's a totally different way. That won't go as well as other things. So obviously this is available in various places, and it's certainly useful, and thank you very much.